Welcome back to another deep dive. For those of you joining us today, we are going to be exploring a really intense stack of sources that all circle around a specific year.
Yeah, 1980. It is a massive flashpoint.
Right, 1980, it's this pivotal moment in North America where the hidden crisis of domestic violence suddenly became, well, impossible to ignore.
Absolutely impossible. It was a complete cultural reckoning.
And to guide you through this, we have some incredible source material. We're synthesizing a super dense 1981 Santa Clara Law Review article. It details California's landmark Domestic Violence Prevention Act.
Plus, we have several really fascinating film critiques and essays about Bob Fosse's 1983 movie star 80.
Right. And we're also pulling from some modern Reddit discussions to see how people today are dissecting the culture of that era. Because our mission today is to figure out how a society actually wakes up to a crisis.
How it responds when the darkness behind closed doors is suddenly out on the front page.
Exactly. How the high-profile murder of a rising Hollywood star basically mirrored the horrific everyday reality for thousands of families, and how the legal system and pop culture just scrambled to respond. So we have to start with the tragedy that really forced the culture to look at this, the story of Dorothy Stratten.
Yeah. Stratton's story is so often remembered as this glitzy Hollywood tragedy, but looking at the mechanics of it, it is just a textbook case of systemic failure.
It really is. The modern Reddit threads make this so clear. In the late 70s, she was a 17-year-old high school student working at a Dairy Queen in Vancouver.
Just a normal teenager. And that's where she met Paul Snyder.
Who was essentially a small-time hustler, a pimp operating on the fringes of the local club scene.
Yeah, and the discussions point out how methodical he was. He didn't just casually date her, he actively groomed her.
He forged her mother's signature, didn't he?
He did. He forged a parental consent form so he could legally maneuver her toward Playboy magazine. He saw an asset and realized her appearance was his ticket out of his own low-level grift.
And, his gamble worked incredibly fast. By 1980, she's in Los Angeles. She is Playboy's Playmate of the Year, and she's actually booking mainstream movie roles.
She was entirely eclipsing him.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because looking at their dynamic, Snyder functions exactly like a parasitic vine. He attaches himself to the strong host tree just to pull himself up out of obscurity. But the second he reaches the sunlight and the tree tries to grow independently, his instinct is to just completely strangle and destroy the host.
That is a very accurate way to describe it.
And that all culminated in August of 1980. Stratten finally tried to separate from him, and in response, Snyder raped and murdered her with a shotgun, defiled her corpse, and then killed himself.
The profound escalation of his jealousy when she tried to leave, that is a pattern we see constantly in abuse dynamics. That moment of leaving is statistically the most dangerous time.
But the piece that I just keep getting stuck on is her environment. She wasn't isolated in some remote cabin. She was living at the Playboy Mansion.
Surrounded by people.
Right. She had extreme wealth, massive celebrity, private security around her. Did the glittering, glamorous distraction of that whole Hollywood and Playboy lifestyle essentially blind everyone around Dorothy to the classic textbook signs of severe domestic abuse?
Well, the thing is, isolation isn't just geographical. It is deeply psychological. Snyder exerted this immense financial and emotional control over her. He effectively walled her off even when she was standing in a crowded room.
Wow, walled off in public.
Exactly. And this high-profile case was merely the tip of an incredibly dark iceberg in society at that time.
Yeah.
You have to remember, in the 70s and 80s, domestic violence was simply not talked about openly.
The Reddit threads really highlight that. It was a massive taboo.
It was. People at those mansion parties saw Snyder acting erratic and jealous, sure, but they just wrote him off as an eccentric hanger-on. They did not have the vocabulary to recognize his behavior as a lethal threat.
Which brings us to a really terrifying transition. Because if this could happen to an incredibly famous woman surrounded by powerful people, what was happening to everyday people experiencing this in their own homes?
And that takes us directly to the 1981 Santa Clara Law Review article. It provides a truly grim snapshot of the legal vacuum at that exact time.
The statistics in this review are just staggering.
They are. Based on the Attorney General's 1978 conferences, domestic violence occurred in 25% of all families in the country.
A quarter of all families.
Yes. And in California, the stats suggested that 50% of married women would be assaulted by their husbands. Half.
Half of all married women. That is just, I can't even wrap my head around that. And the escalation numbers are even worse.
Right. Between 1976 and 1978 in California, 4.3% of male homicide victims were murdered by their wives, but a staggering 18.5% of female homicide victims were murdered by their husbands.
So, how did the old laws handle this? I mean, with a 50% assault rate, you'd think the police would be heavily involved.
You would think so, but no. Police officers were actually trained in something called crisis intervention. And the explicit goal of that training was to keep domestic violence out of the criminal justice system entirely.
Wait, really? Out of the system?
Yes, it was viewed strictly as a private, civil problem. Even in severe felony-level beatings, a 1978 San Francisco study showed only a 13% conviction rate.
13%. So the police were just acting like impromptu couples counselors.
Exactly. Tell the husband to take a walk around the block, calm down, and then the police would just leave.
And the civil remedies, like temporary restraining orders or TROs, were basically useless before 1980. The language was so vague, a judge would just enjoin parties from disturbing the peace.
Disturbing the peace, it means nothing.
It's like putting a flimsy keep off the grass sign on a train track to try and stop a runaway freight train. It is completely useless, legally toothless, and honestly inherently dangerous to rely on.
It gave victims a completely false sense of security. And to even get one of those orders, you had to actively be filing for a marital dissolution, a divorce or separation.
Which meant unmarried cohabitants had almost zero protective remedies.
Zero. And the police had no real authority to enforce the orders anyway. What's fascinating here is that the law wasn't just failing to protect victims. This policy of non-involvement actively emboldened the abusers.
Because it proved to them that there would be no consequences.
Exactly. The system practically guaranteed they could get away with it.
So the keep off the grass signs clearly weren't working. The system desperately needed an overhaul, which leads us to California passing Senate Bill 9.
Yes, which included the Domestic Violence Prevention Act.
The DVPA. And this was enacted on July 1st, 1980, the very same summer Dorothy Stratten was killed.
The timing is incredible, and this law brought some massive changes. The most novel aspect was the expanded definition of a family or household member.
Right, it finally covered non-traditional families. Unmarried cohabiting couples were finally protected. It moved beyond that strict requirement of a traditional marriage.
And the language shifted too. They stopped using vague terms like molesting or disturbing the peace, and actually outlined specific restrained behaviors.
It finally had some teeth. Police agencies were required to maintain a verification system for these orders.
Which is crucial. An officer could actually check if an order existed. And a willful violation was elevated to a misdemeanor.
Punishable by up to 6 months in jail, right?
Okay.
Or a $500 fine.
Yes. The threat of jail time was finally on the table. But the law still had some serious ambiguities.
Yeah, I want to push back on the celebration of this new law for a second, because the review mentions a move-out order where a judge could kick an abuser out of a shared home.
Right, but in a non-marital situation, the victim had to prove a right under color of law to the property.
Which was so vaguely defined. Does that essentially mean that rich abusers, guys with their names on the lease or the deed, could still legally terrorize their partners, basically trapping lower-income victims who had no legal title to their homes?
This raises an important question, and the legal scholars pointed this exact flaw out. While Senate Bill 9 was this massive leap forward, the law still really struggled to fully decouple physical safety from financial and property rights.
If you didn't have your name on the paperwork, the protection kind of stopped at your front door.
It did. It highlights how intertwined financial leverage is with domestic abuse.
So the law is trying to change behavior through legislation in 1980, but a few years later, pop culture attempts to process this trauma. Let's transition from the courtroom to the cinema.
Bob Fosse's 1983 film adaptation of the Stratton tragedy, Star 80.
Foss is such a fascinating choice for this. He's this legendary director, but the film critiques note his intense, almost disturbing identification with Paul Snider.
Foss was very open about his own obsessive, womanizing, and self-destructive tendencies. So instead of centering the victim, he made the film deeply about the abuser.
His commitment to that realism was terrifying. He cast Eric Roberts as Snider, and he actually made Roberts sleep in the real-life Los Angeles apartment where the murder-suicide took place.
I mean, the psychological toll of that is just immense.
It's grueling, and it leads to a cinematic climax that is just pure nihilism. It isn't a standard Greek tragedy with a flawed hero.
No, it denies the audience any catharsis.
Yeah.
Fosse used 16 rapid-fire shots in just 25 seconds to build that climax.
Contrasting Snyder's violent rage, loading the shotgun, with Stratton's passivity, There's that fatal hesitation at the door where she could have run.
He stretches that freeze response out so painfully. And unsurprisingly, the film completely bombed at the box office.
Which makes sense. It's the early 80s, the Reagan era. Audiences wanted ameliorative fantasies. They wanted the good guy to win.
They definitely didn't want a bleak message that the house always wins and the monster is in your living room.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Based on these essays, was Foss actually trying to make a profound statement about the horrific reality of domestic abuse? Or was he just indulging his own dark, self-hating obsession with, as the essays call it, female sexuality as a destructive force?
That is the core debate. Star 80 is widely considered a film maudit, a cursed film. And it's precisely because Foss forces the audience into this incredibly uncomfortable position. You have to understand the pathetic, dangerous psychology of a killer.
You're stuck in Snyder's headspace.
Exactly. Foss is critiquing it, but he's also undeniably indulging his own demons.
Which brings us to the broader complicity of the culture. Fosse's film didn't just indict Snyder. It indicted the entire ecosystem that surrounded Dorothy Stratten.
The legal system was waking up, but the culture in Hollywood was still profoundly toxic.
The Open Letters Monthly essay and the Reddit debates dive deep into the other men in her life. Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy, and Peter Bogdanovich, the film director.
Right. Stratton was really prey to 3 different men who all used her for their own ends.
Hefner used her to buttress his own star maker image. Foss even films him subtly manipulating her like a ventriloquist dummy.
It's a brilliant visual motif.
Hmm.
And Bogdanovich just used her as this beautiful blank slate muse for his art.
It's like her life was a highly valuable piece of intellectual property, and she is just being aggressively fought over by 3 rival corporations. None of them care what she wants.
That is a perfect analogy.
So is the true horror of Star 80, that the societal machine worked exactly as designed, objectifying a woman until she was entirely consumed.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see that Snyder's ultimate motive wasn't just romantic jealousy.
What was it then?
It was a toxic desire for fame without accomplishment. He is portrayed in the film as a dark, funhouse mirror reflection of Hugh Hefner.
Just without the wealth and the class.
Right. He's the Playboy philosophy incarnate, just stripped of the glamour. He realized he was losing his only valuable asset, and if he couldn't ride her coattails to fame, he would destroy her to permanently attach his name to hers.
And the critics noted the massive irony here. Both Foss and Teresa Carpenter, who wrote the original journalism pieces, basically denied Stratton any true agency.
They painted her merely as a hapless bimbo and a passive victim.
Yeah, and the essays mentioned that Mariel Hemingway, the actress who played Dorothy, reportedly underwent breast augmentation just to secure the role.
Which just proves the culture's relentless focus on physical surface image was still completely thriving while they were making a movie critiquing that exact culture.
It's mind-blowing. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've traveled from the horrific real-world tragedy of a 20-year-old woman to the dense legal mechanics of California's 1980 Senate Bill 9 to a deeply uncomfortable 1983 cinematic masterpiece.
It is a lot to process.
It really is. The big takeaway here is that legal reform and cultural awareness are a two-front war. Laws can redefine what a household is, and they can mandate arrests.
But the culture has to actually redefine how we value human beings over surface-level celebrity. Legislation alone cannot fix a toxic ecosystem.
Exactly. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today. When we consume true crime media today, whether it's a slick documentary on a streaming service or a hit audio series, are we finally centering the victims and holding these toxic systems accountable?
Or are we doing exactly what Foss did?
Right.
Yeah.
Are we, much like Bob Foss in 1983, still secretly identifying with the darkness, using someone else's ultimate tragedy purely for our own dark entertainment? Something to really think about next time you hit play. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.